I am a woman that loves the Lord, a woman that loves life and enjoys life, a woman who has seen both the valleys and the mountaintops, a woman who's had to work through a lot of hurt and pain to be able to be comfortable with myself now. I am a believer that loves to write books. I primarily love to do inner healing because there's so much brokenness out there. I love horses. I love standard tall poodles. I love to laugh, but I can't say that was always so in my life. There was a time when I'd be laughing but was crying on the inside. So today who I am is this woman who is no longer bound by the chains of her past, but I've had to work through the process of being set free. Most people, when they first look at me in Africa, think that I'm African, but as soon as I begin talking, excuse me, they know that I'm not. I am from the United States, born and raised in St. Paul, Minnesota. I have 2 children. I have a 46-year-old son and a 44-year-old daughter, a 23-year-old granddaughter, 19-year-old grandson, and an 8-year-old grandson. And I was born and raised in one of the coldest states in the country. We have winters 6 months out of the year. So that's where I was born, but God has allowed me to travel all over the world, and I enjoy international travel. I enjoy global ministry. One of the things that I learned is you can never look at a person and determine what they went through. Life growing up was worse than difficult. I don't even know if I have another word for it, but I grew up in a family where we had all the material trappings, but every kind of abuse you can imagine we suffered at the hands of my father. Verbal abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse. And so on the outside, everything looked just fine. On the inside, we were all very, very broken. And sometimes it felt like when I was leaving the house, I was no longer a prisoner, but always having to go back into the house. I was very much a prisoner. We all were. And so we were going to church every Sunday. That's one of the reasons why I think I'm so concerned about believers, Christians who are hurting, because a lot of times we think that just because we go to church, that's enough, and that somehow the pain should go away. And a lot of times it goes much deeper than just going to church. That meant that I had to go through inner healing because of the abuse of my father. And the question asked a lot of times was, where was my mother? And when your mother is getting abused, she can't help you get out of your abusive state because she's in hers. And I loved her dearly. My father committed suicide when he was 47 years old. And in my community during that time, black folks didn't commit suicide at all. So it was a very unique and difficult kind of situation. My mother tried to make it as palatable as possible. And I think a lot of times, because of the wealth in the family, buying very expensive things, a lot of times we thought was going to take away the pain. It doesn't matter what you have around you when you're getting beat and when you're getting abused. Those things aren't even an issue. I have to say, on the other hand, in terms of growing up, that I loved a part of my growing up as it related to, I love to sing, I love to dance. I love to dance for the Lord. So those things my mother made a lot of fun. Most of my life growing up, I was afraid. I was afraid that someone was going to see the scars on my body. I was afraid that somebody was going to find out what was going on in our home. And when you grow up in an abusive home, there are many secrets. And as a family therapist and as a pastor, I don't believe in secrets. Somebody knows about them. It's just that they're not saying. And I left home at a very, very early age. And this is sad to say, but it's true. When I left home, the young men I attracted to me beat me worse than my father did. So it's called a familiar spirit. I didn't know that I was walking around with this sign that said, beat me. But there's certain men out there who are abusive, and they can tell a woman who has low self-esteem. There are also women that are abusive. I've done ministry with men who are being physically abused by women, or men who've been sexually abused. So I was able to come out of all of that, but I needed to go through a lot of healing. There is one statement my father would make all in one sentence. Peggy, you're dumb, you're stupid, you're ugly, and you'll never amount to anything. And when I do training on inner healing, I talk about how a child's basic personality is formed by the age of 6. So whatever happens to you from the womb up to the age of 6, that's ingrained in your spirit. So as a child, I saw a lot of physical abuse. My father would call me the B word. But to hear your own father say, you're dumb, you're stupid, you're ugly, and you'll never amount to anything. I didn't believe just one of those things. I believed all of them. And so did my brothers and sisters. We just went different ways in terms of how we dealt with our pain. How I dealt with my pain was very unconsciously to prove Daddy wrong. I'm going to get as many degrees as I can possibly get. And at age 22, I had a stroke, trying to prove Daddy wrong. Daddy was already dead. He had already committed suicide. But that did not change the memory of the lies that the enemy was telling me. And I thought that you didn't have a stroke until you're like old, right? So I'm 66 now. And so I would think someone 70 or 75 would have a stroke, but not a 22-year-old. But at 22, I was married. I had 2 children. I had a full-time job, and I owned my own business and ministry, and I was on 6 different boards in the community. I knew something was wrong with my body, but when the internal message is, you're no good, you're no good, you're no good, I couldn't even stop. And I used to say, Lord, something's wrong with me. I don't know what it is, but something's going on with my left side. And I remember the day I walked into the office and threw up first and fell across the threshold. And I woke up in an ambulance. I could feel nothing on my left side, and I could feel these tears on the right side. And I thought God loved me enough to knock me down and not knock me out. I think for someone that's grown up in an abusive home, I'd look at 2 different things. Number one, are you still in it? You've got young people that are being physically and sexually and emotionally abused. And in my country, we have a lot of therapists, we have a lot of counselors who deal with that. I don't know about that in Nairobi. I don't know about that in Africa. Then there's the individual who's now an adult who was abused as a child, but still is acting like an abused person. What I would say to the young person is find someone to talk to that you can trust, because when you hold all of that pain on the inside, you can never be all of who God created you to be. For the woman or the man, but it's usually a woman who now is an adult that grew up abused, but now she's very silent, I would say that number one, you can call our number. We do inner healing and counseling, and that we'll walk her through what was the hard part so that she can get to the healed part. I also would say to either of them, it's going to be okay. It won't always hurt this bad. How you begin the healing process is to be honest about what happened. I'm finding it very interesting in Africa that I'll get phone calls, or the ministry will get phone calls from women that have been abused, but they don't really want to talk. They do want to talk about, they don't want anyone to know it. I got a call yesterday, as a matter of fact, from a woman who was having a problem, and I said, well, we need to go back to the root. I see your behavior now, but why are you acting like that now? And so I said, tell me about you as a child. My childhood was fine. Okay, something happened. So we always need to go to the root. All too often, either we're in denial and dealing with nothing, or we want to deal with just the symptoms. In order for God to heal, completely heal, you've got to go back to the very beginning. And what we do is called inner healing. where we allow Jesus to take you back to the beginning and the root of the trauma. That's the word that's very important. There may be someone that doesn't look traumatized. I didn't look traumatized, but we need to deal with what trauma occurred before the age of 6 that caused you to behave in a way that got you where you are today. It's not about being judgmental. We're not judgmental. We're saying don't keep believing the lies of the enemy. I believed the lies of the enemy for so long in my life. I really used to think I was ugly. I don't think I'm that bad looking. I really used to believe that I was stupid. I know that I'm not. But when it's pounded into you physically and emotionally, you believe it, but healing can occur. I believe one of the reasons why there's more violence is because the church isn't doing a part of what it needs to do. There's a church that you can go to where you can shout and you can get happy and still go home broken and getting beat. I know pastors that are abusive, so that means the first lady is being abused, and nobody talks about that. He doesn't have a way out because he was a victim at some point in time, and she had a way out. I think there's an increase in domestic violence in the home because I think there's more dissatisfaction with what's going on in the world. You've got, for instance, in my country, a lot of African American men who have a difficult time maybe finding a job. Well, it's very important for a man to be respected. And if you add disrespect to alcohol or drug usage, which I think is another reason why there's more violence that's being shown, is because somehow drugs and alcohol, in one instance they numb you, but in another instance they can make you get outside of yourself and act differently. So until we start dealing with some of those issues, I think there's going to be an increase. God called me to this ministry back in 1984. Um, well, 43 years ago, I asked Jesus into my heart. And on that night, I said, Lord, anything that you want me to do, I'll do it. I'll go wherever you want me to go. I'll say whatever you want me to say. I'll do whatever it is that you want me to do. And I began to get a sense of I'm supposed to be in ministry. Well, I was raised in a Baptist church. No one ever told me that once you ask Jesus into your heart, you've already got a ministry. You just need to figure out what it is. And so after a lot of prayer and a lot of fasting, a very strong knowing came to me that I was to preach and that I was to teach. And I love doing both. I love to do training. I love to teach people about how they can be set free. And I love to preach. One of the things that I went through when I was younger that's helping me in ministry now, at age 3, I began to learn from my leaders at my church how to be a leader. And they drilled it into us, you will be a leader in your community. And this is what a leader in your community or our community looks like. That helps me now. I began speaking publicly when I was 6 years old. So for me to preach in front of 10 million people or 6 people is very much like breathing for me because I started at a very early age, so that makes it easy for me. The I'm Finally Free training, I'm Finally Free is the latest book that I've written, and I Am Finally Free, the subtitle of it is 7 Steps to Overcoming Emotional Bondage. And what the book is about has to do with making personal choices, and that sometimes we make personal choices that don't bless us, actually they hurt us very much so. So the book is about an assessment and talking about emotional intelligence. I asked the question, do you find yourself saying yes when you really want to say no? Do you find that you don't want people to know how you really feel because they may get upset with you? And I talk about wearing a mask in the book. So the book then talks about how does one become emotionally bound? And I actually go all the way back to the Garden of Eden. Whenever we go against the will of God, someone can become emotionally bound. How I became emotionally bound, meaning I couldn't express my emotions freely, was because of the environment that I grew up in. We could never say we were angry. We always had to have a smile on our face, even though we were crying deeply within our heart. Then the book talks about 7 spirits that bind. One is called a slumbering spirit. And there's so many people who are slumbering, which means they're not fully awakened in their personal spirit. If you are wondering if you have a slumbering spirit, take a look at who you attract into your life. I said earlier that had I been healthier, and I wasn't, I wouldn't have attracted men into my life that beat me. It wasn't until I got the healing, the inner healing that I needed. So the book is about understanding how you got there, and most importantly, the 7 steps to overcoming being emotionally bound. Emotional intelligence is a big conversation these days, and some people cannot become better at being emotionally intelligent till they deal with their emotional bondage. So the book helps you walk through those steps and how to come out of that. I've written many other books. One of them, or most of them, are, no, all of them are Christian nonfiction self-help books. I actually can't write a book until I've been through something and come out of it. So one of the books is called Understanding and Breaking Free from Emotional Bondage. One of the books that I've written that's very controversial is about the Freemasons. My father was Illuminati, and it was when he took his life, after they took his body out of the room, I went in the room to kneel and pray for him, and the Lord said, "Get up, he'll never be with me." And a lot of people think they know a lot about Masons, and they really don't. And so God allowed me to travel all over the world and learn about Freemasonry, and then to write the book. And the book is from a biblical perspective, Why No Man Can Serve Two Masters. That's one of the books that I've written. I actually use that as an evangelism tool because I want Masons to know they're not worshiping God, even though they call themselves a Christian Mason. That's an unholy alliance. So the book speaks the truth about why it's an unholy alliance. There's another book that I've written on having to do with how to bring healing to the broken hearts of African Americans. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's niece, Dr. Elvita King, is a friend of mine, and she wrote the foreword to the book. And that book is about the history of how we became broken. Why are we still broken now as a people group? And how do we bring healing to African Americans? What inspires me to write the books is a relationship with God. I have these conversations with God. What do you want me to do? How do you want me to do it? And or there'll be something someone will say that will happen. What will happen in my spirit is I need to write about that. I'm more of a public speaker. Writing for me is not the easiest thing. It's easier than it was before. But I recognize as an African American female in our country, in our culture, we're very oral and we've written very little down. And so even being in Africa, I recognize very oral but not a lot written down. And so I write about healing. That's what's inspired me, is that when God takes me through healing, then I can write a book. It will be interesting because the book I'm writing now happens to be, the title is this, Caribou, from Minnesota to Africa and back home again. The things that I've experienced in visiting here are just phenomenal to me. We're so alike in so many ways, and yet we're so different based on our countries. And I have a real heart's desire now to bring more African Americans to Africa. All of us need to come home at least once and experience a short-term missions trip if possible. What drives me as a person, I think because I was so broken and now I'm not broken. I'm not saying I'm perfect, but I see differently. I feel differently. I have real joy. What healing God has done on the inside of me comes on the outside. And I'm driven to see other people be set free. The driving force behind healing is that I recognize a lot of people don't want to talk about being broken. And yet, if you're broken, everything around you and every relationship around you is not the fullest of what it could be because you're not the fullest of who you could be. So I want to see people heal so that they can begin to walk in the anointing and the creativity that God has given them. And you can only do that when you're healed. So I know if I can go through what I've been through all kinds of abuse, not just at home, but from men that were boyfriends. If I can go through, I went through a season of losing everything at one time. I tell people I don't know Job, I know Job, but the key is I'm still here and I'm in my right mind and I love life and I enjoy life. So I went through a period a number of years ago where I lost my family, not because they wanted to go away. I have wonderful children, but I had a husband who walked out. And when he walked out, we all felt rejected and didn't know where he had gone. And so within a matter of 48 hours, I no longer had the relationships in my family that I used to have. All the money was gone. All my business was gone. Someone stole my dog and my fish died. And I tell people, I don't just know the story of Job, I know the story of Job. And it's wonderful when at the end of the story of Job, God brings back the family. And so I've got my children back to an extent. My mother went home to be with the Lord, and I'm in ministry again. Some of the lessons that I've learned through life. Lesson number one, God loves us unconditionally, but he wants us to be obedient to his will. I think another lesson that I've learned is that this too shall pass. And I don't mean that in a trite way at all. When you're going through hard times, all you can see is what's in front of you. And you can't even begin to see that there'll be a future. There were times I've been suicidal. There were times that I just could never see a life outside of what I was going through. But I know that there's a God. And I had to learn that my issues with my father, the physical father, are not the same issues with God. And a lot of times we compare the two. Often we're very comfortable with Jesus as our brother, but God the Father, it has a lot to do with our relationship with an earthly father or lack of that. So I've learned a lot of lessons. I think my next book after this book should be on lessons I've learned. Healing Tea with Dr. Peggy. At some point, I'm going to have a show called Healing Tea with Dr. Peggy. In my country, the word tea is used as gossip. That's not how I'm meaning it here. I'm in Africa. We have tea 3, 4, 5, 6 times a day, depending on how many meetings you have or how many homes you go to. I love tea. I was going to open up a tea room back in my hometown. So Healing Tea with Dr. Peggy has to do with, I'll be teaching about tea and I'll be talking about healing. Tea is very healing physiologically. There's something about a comfort level when you're taking tea. So I'll teach about tea. I'll do a documentary on the tea fields. But until the actual program comes about, this coming Monday, I actually will start a Facebook group called Healing Tea with Dr. Peggy. So if anyone wants to know more about that, they'll go to Dr. Peggy Elliot on my Facebook page, leave their email address, and I'll let them know more about the show. I want people to look at me, not for who I am physically, but to know that there's life after pain. There's life after deep, deep sorrow. There's life after regret. All of us have made mistakes, but we are not our mistakes. I am not my past. I am who God created me to be. And as I continue to grow and have a teachable spirit, I'll become more like that. I want people to know that there is someone that will listen to their hurt and listen to their pain. I especially want a message out there to pastors. There are so many hurting pastors, and a part of my ministry is pastoral care. I I do inner healing with pastors, with bishops, anyone in the fivefold ministry, and no one knows really who I'm doing that with because they need a safe place to be able to talk. There's too many suicides with pastors. There's too much alcoholism. There's too much abuse going on with pastors, so it can be that safe place to land. I also want people to know that they can call the ministry at 0700-346-836. I cannot remember the second number, so can I get my piece of paper? Okay. And the second number is 0769-348-734. If you want to send an email, it's Elliot with 2 L's and 2 T's, ministries@gmail.com, and the website is drpeggyelliot.org. I want people to know we're here. We will, if they'll reach out, we'll reach back.